Sign or get out." My wife mocked, waving the divorce papers while sitting on her lover's lap in the center of my own living room. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I quietly turned and walked out the front door to execute the legal protocol she didn't know existed. 72 hours later, their entire world collapsed and they never saw it coming. For 7 years, I was the anchor in a storm I didn't realize was manufactured. My wife, Chloe, was a master architect of chaos, and I was her designated contractor, tasked with endlessly rebuilding the structures she found joy in tearing down. She sold me a story of a woman wronged by the world, a brilliant victim of circumstance who just needed a stable foundation. I provided that foundation. I gave her the sprawling 4-bedroom house, the premium healthcare, and the limitless credit card that she swiped with the casual indifference of someone who had never earned a $1 in her life. I also took on her son, Mason. Mason was 12 when we married, and he was the quintessential golden child. In Chloe's eyes, he was a misunderstood genius who could do no wrong. If I tried to impose a basic curfew, I was an authoritarian monster. If I asked him to clean up the wreckage he left in the kitchen, I was stifling his creative process. The golden child dynamic was so deeply entrenched that I spent years swallowing my own frustration just to keep the peace. Keeping the peace. It is a funny phrase. We use it to describe the act of quietly setting ourselves on fire so that someone else doesn't have to feel the chill of their own consequences. Over time, the gaslighting became the ambient background noise of my life. Chloe had a terrifying ability to rewrite history in real time. If money went missing from our joint account, thousands funneled into her mysterious wellness retreats, she would twist the conversation until I was apologizing for being financially controlling. She used my empathy as a weapon. She knew my deepest fear was abandonment. So, whenever I tried to establish boundaries regarding our finances, she would look at me with tears in her eyes and say she thought I actually loved them. And so, I would fold. I would work longer hours, burying myself in spreadsheets to fund the illusion of our happy family. But illusions are expensive to maintain. The most glaring crack was a man named Julian. Julian was a personal trainer Chloe met at her high-end gym. He became a fitness consultant for a phantom company Chloe decided she was launching. Within 6 months, Julian was practically a fixture in my home. He would be lounging by the pool when I got home from work, drinking my expensive scotch and offering smug advice about my posture. He possessed the arrogant confidence of someone who never had to pay his own bills. Whenever I expressed discomfort, the gaslighting flared up like a grease fire. She would scoff and ask if I was seriously jealous of a work colleague. She told me I was insecure and that Julian was helping her build a future for our family since I was always too busy to care about her dreams. I wanted to believe her to avoid the exhausting truth. My rational mind was desperate to keep the marriage together, but my subconscious had already started packing its bags. The shift happened 6 months ago. I was looking for a tax document in Chloe's home office. Instead, I found a leather-bound notebook tucked beneath unpaid parking tickets. I shouldn't have opened it, but the instinct for self-preservation overrode my conditioned obedience. Inside wasn't a business plan. It was a financial blueprint for my ruin. Chloe and Julian had been meticulously mapping out my assets. They had lists of my investment accounts, equity estimates, and a timeline detailing how long they needed to stay married to me to secure maximum alimony. There were notes in Julian's handwriting suggesting ways Chloe could trigger arguments to establish a documented history of emotional distress. They were planning to force me out of my own home and use my wealth to fund their new life. My blood ran cold. I sat there in the dimly lit office, staring at the pages. All the late nights, all the compromises I had swallowed, it was all a long con. I wasn't a partner. I was a host organism. I put the notebook back. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hands were steady. For the first time in 7 years, the fog vanished. The paralyzing fear of losing my family was replaced by terrifying clarity. I didn't confront her. Confrontation is for people who want apologies, and I didn't want an apology. I wanted my life back. That very afternoon, I called an old college friend who happened to be a ruthless asset protection attorney. We didn't talk about feelings. We talked about LLC structures, irrevocable trusts, and the precise legal definition of marital property. Chloe thought she was playing chess, but she didn't realize I owned the board. She assumed the assets were jointly held. She never bothered to read the fine print of the prenup she enthusiastically signed 7 years ago. For 6 months, I quietly built a bulletproof paper trail, waiting for the day she would finally overplay her hand. Every intercepted text message, every unexplained withdrawal, and every arrogant smirk Julian gave me across my own kitchen island was meticulously logged, screenshotted, and sent to a secure offshore server my lawyer maintained. I let her rack up charges. I let her feel invincible. I smiled through the absolute worst of it, knowing that the trap was already set, the springs pulled back, and all I had to do was wait for her to step right onto the trigger. The audacity of their entitlement grew with every passing week. Julian started leaving his protein powder on my kitchen counters and parking his leased sports car in my designated garage spot. When I finally asked him to move it, Chloe intercepted, claiming Julian's car was sensitive to the sun and that I should just park on the street. It was a bizarre, surreal existence, functioning as a guest in a life I was entirely funding. I watched them operate with the smug satisfaction of parasites convinced they had successfully sedated their host. Mason, the eternal golden child, was weaponized next. Now 19 and failing his freshman year of college, he decided he needed a brand new truck to improve his mental health. I told him absolutely not. I set clear boundaries, explaining that a $60,000 vehicle was not a cure for laziness. Chloe lost her mind. She accused me of financial abuse and claimed I was deliberately trying to destroy her son's future. She tried to purchase the truck anyway, marching down to the dealership with my supplementary credit card. What she didn't know was that I had already quietly lowered the limit on that specific card to $500. The transaction declined. The fallout from the dealership was magnificent, but she spun it into another grievance for her master plan. Julian texted her, which I read on the server, saying this was the perfect catalyst. It was time to pull the trigger. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I had intentionally left my office early, knowing from their digital trail that Julian was coming over for a strategy session. I unlocked the front door and walked down the hallway. The scent of Julian's cheap cologne hit me before I even reached the living room. There they were. The scene was almost comical in its cliché. Chloe was sitting on Julian's lap in the center of my custom leather sofa. On the glass coffee table in front of them rested a thick stack of legal documents. Divorce papers. Chloe didn't even flinch when I walked in. She simply smiled, a cold, predatory smirk that she had probably practiced in the mirror for days. She picked up the papers and waved them at me like a winning lottery ticket. "Sign or get out." My wife mocked, her voice dripping with venom. Julian chuckled, taking a sip of his drink. "You heard her, man. It's over. She's keeping the house, the cars, and the primary accounts. We have documentation of your emotional neglect. You can either make this easy and sign over your equity, or we drag you through court and take it all anyway. So pack your bags." They were waiting for a reaction. They wanted me to scream. They wanted me to fall to my knees, beg for forgiveness, and validate their delusion of power. Julian even had his phone resting on the armrest, the camera lens subtly pointed in my direction, hoping to capture an unhinged, violent outburst to guarantee their restraining order. I didn't give them the satisfaction. I looked at the papers. I looked at my wife. And then I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Okay," I said. I kept my voice steady. The absolute calm in my tone made Julian's smile falter for just a fraction of a second. I turned around and walked up the stairs to our master bedroom. I didn't throw things. I didn't break a single picture frame. I calmly pulled my suitcase from the closet and I packed my bags. I took my suits, my watch collection, and my personal documents. I didn't take a single piece of furniture or anything that could be contested as marital property. I left the expensive jewelry I bought her. I left the designer shoes. When I walked back down the stairs 15 minutes later, pulling my luggage behind me, they were still sitting there. They looked confused. This wasn't the script they had written. "You're really just leaving?" Chloe asked, a flicker of uncertainty finally crossing her features. "You're not going to fight for your home?" "It's all yours, Chloe," I replied quietly. "Enjoy it." I walked out the front door, got into my car, and drove away. What Chloe and Julian didn't understand, but they fundamentally failed to grasp, because they were too busy plotting their theft to actually read any legal documents, was that there was no marital home to fight over. The property we lived in was never in my name, and it was certainly never in hers. Before we ever got married, my lawyer advised me to protect my assets. The sprawling 4-bedroom house was entirely owned by a corporate trust, which leased the property to an LLC. I was the sole managing member of that LLC. The monthly mortgage payments Chloe thought she was entitled to half of were actually just rent payments transferred from my personal account to my corporate account. The house was a rental. Furthermore, our prenuptial agreement, which she signed without having her own lawyer review it because she wanted to play the role of the trusting, unbothered bride, explicitly stated that in the event of a divorce filing, any right of residency for the non-owning spouse immediately terminated. By handing me those divorce papers and demanding I leave, she hadn't secured $1 million asset. She had just formally submitted her own notice of eviction. And because the LLC was the technical landlord, she wasn't just dealing with a bitter ex-husband anymore. She was dealing with a corporate entity that had zero emotional attachment to her or her golden child. I checked into a luxury hotel downtown, poured myself a glass of exceptionally good bourbon, and opened my laptop. I sent a single, 2-word email to my attorney. Execute it. I spent the rest of the evening watching the digital security cameras from the house. I watched Julian carry his duffel bag through the front door, officially moving himself in. I watched Mason and Chloe order expensive takeout on a credit card that was scheduled to be deactivated at midnight. The sheer arrogance was intoxicating to witness from afar. They were celebrating in a house they were legally trespassing in, drinking champagne they couldn't afford, completely oblivious to the fact that their financial execution was already scheduled for Friday morning. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They didn't realize I had built the room, locked the door, and just walked out with the only key. The first 24 hours were quiet. It takes a little time for the machinery of financial ruin to fully engage. On Wednesday morning, the automated systems took over. At precisely 9 in the morning, every supplementary credit card attached to my name was frozen. The joint checking account, which I had legally drained of my direct deposits weeks prior, sat at a balance of 0. I was sitting in my hotel room, sipping coffee, watching the decline transaction alerts roll in on my phone. An upscale organic grocery store. Declined. A luxury spa. Declined. An international flight portal. Declined. Then the phone call started. She called 5 times in 10 minutes. I didn't answer. I didn't cry. I took action. I simply forwarded her number to a voicemail box specifically set up for legal documentation, maintaining absolute no contact. By Thursday, panic had mutated into rage, and she launched a frantic smear campaign. She took to social media, weaving a tragic narrative for our mutual friends and family. She posted a tearful video claiming I had suffered a mental breakdown, abandoned her and Mason, and was trying to starve them out of their own home. She played the helpless victim flawlessly. A few flying monkeys, aunts, and mutual acquaintances texted me, calling me a monster. I didn't bother defending myself. You cannot reason with someone who benefits from misunderstanding you. I just kept taking screenshots and sending them to the offshore server. Every defamatory post was just another nail in the coffin of her alimony case. She thought she was winning the public relations war. But I wasn't fighting a PR war. I was fighting a legal one. On Friday morning, she demanded a formal meeting. She sent an email through Julian, adopting an air of magnanimous mercy, stating they were willing to negotiate my surrender in person. My attorney, David, agreed to host them at his downtown office. I arrived early and sat at the far end of the long mahogany conference table. 10 minutes later, the door swung open. Chloe walked in wearing a designer dress I had paid for, radiating unearned confidence. Julian was right behind her, acting as her makeshift legal counsel, wearing a tight suit that looked like a cheap rental. They sat across from me, spreading their meaningless divorce papers on the table. Well, Chloe began, crossing her arms. I hope you've had time to think about how ridiculous you are being. My lawyer says the judge is going to crucify you for cutting off our access to marital funds. Who is your lawyer exactly? David asked mildly, adjusting his glasses. I am advising her for now. Julian puffed out his chest, leaning forward. We know the law. She's entitled to half the equity in the house, continued maintenance of her current lifestyle, and a lump sum for emotional distress. Sign the deed transfer and reinstate the cards, or we take this to trial and destroy his reputation. I just looked at him. The sheer, unadulterated ignorance was staggering. David didn't even blink. He slid a single, crisp manila folder across the table toward Chloe. There will be no deed transfer, ma'am. The property you currently reside in is owned by Apex Holdings LLC. My client is the managing director. As of your divorce filing on Tuesday, which triggered the immediate termination clause in your prenuptial agreement, you are legally classified as unauthorized squatters. Chloe let out a scoff, waving her hand dismissively. We signed a prenup years ago. That doesn't mean anything. It's my primary residence. It means everything, David corrected, his voice dropping an octave, losing all warmth. You waived your right to contest property not in your name. Furthermore, you are in violation of a corporate lease. I am serving you with a formal 72-hour notice to vacate the premises. He slid a second piece of paper across the desk. Additionally, this is a lawsuit filed by Apex Holdings against both of you for trespassing, unauthorized occupation, and damages. The local sheriff has already been notified. If you are not off the property by Monday morning at 8 o'clock, you will be physically removed. The room went dead silent. The air seemed to get sucked out of the space. Chloe stared at the document. She read the bold print at the top. She read the LLC name. She read the signature of the corporate manager. Me. Her eyes darted wildly from the paper to my face, searching for the punchline of a joke she suddenly realized wasn't coming. Their faces drained of color. Julian picked up the document, his bravado evaporating as he scanned the uncompromising legal language. You can't do this, Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. The smirk was completely gone, replaced by the hollow, wide-eyed stare of someone watching a train barrel toward them. Where are we supposed to go? What about Mason? You can't just throw us on the street. You told me to sign or get out, I reminded her. I kept my voice steady, betraying absolutely no emotion. I simply followed your instructions. You wanted a divorce. You wanted my assets. You wanted Julian to take my place. Congratulations, Chloe. You have him. But you don't get to keep my money to fund your new relationship. This is illegal. Julian shouted, slamming his hand on the table, though his voice cracked slightly. She has squatters' rights. We'll drag this out for months. You could, David replied calmly. But if you refuse to vacate, we will immediately submit this to the court. He slid a third, much thicker binder onto the table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. What is that? Chloe asked, barely breathing. That is a comprehensive, 6-month paper trail, I answered, leaning forward and lacing my fingers together. It contains every intercepted text, every hidden transaction, your little notebook of financial strategies, and video evidence of infidelity occurring in a corporate-owned property. It proves premeditated fraud and malicious intent. I finally smiled. Checkmate, Chloe. David closed the binder. The sound echoed in the silent conference room like a judge's gavel striking wood. Chloe didn't speak. She couldn't. For the first time in our 7-year relationship, she was completely stripped of her narrative control. There was no gaslighting her way out of a corporate eviction notice backed by a mountain of digital forensics. Julian, suddenly realizing the immense financial liability he had just strutted into, slowly pushed his chair back from the table. The smug fitness consultant who had been casually drinking my expensive scotch 48 hours ago was suddenly looking at my wife like she was a radioactive asset. I think we're done here, David said calmly, standing up and smoothing his silk tie. You have until Monday at exactly 8 p.m. to vacate the Apex Holdings property. If you attempt to remove any fixtures, appliances, or items not strictly qualifying as personal apparel, you will be prosecuted for theft. Have a pleasant weekend. I stood up, buttoned my suit jacket, and walked out of the room without looking back. I didn't need to see her cry. I didn't want her empty apologies. I wanted her gone, and the law was handling the extraction with cold, emotionless efficiency. The weekend that followed was a masterclass in watching a parasite try to find a new host. Through the security cameras which I legally maintained access to, As the designated property manager, I watched their toxic, arrogant dynamic completely implode. By Saturday afternoon, the romantic illusion between Chloe and Julian had evaporated into thin air. Without my platinum credit cards to fund their luxury lifestyle, Julian lost interest at terminal velocity. I watched them screaming at each other in the driveway. Julian was throwing his designer gym bags into his leased sports car, clearly furious that his golden ticket had turned out to be a legal landmine. Chloe was sobbing uncontrollably, grabbing at his arm, begging him not to leave her alone to face the mess she created. He forcefully shoved her away, got into his car, and sped off without a second glance. He wasn't looking for a partner. He was looking for a sugar daddy by proxy. The moment the funds were cut, his profound love vanished. Then came Mason, the eternal golden child, completely insulated from reality and consequence his entire life, was suddenly forced to pack his chaotic room into black plastic garbage bags. I received a frantic, aggressive text message from him on Sunday night. He demanded to know how I could do this to them, calling me a vindictive psychopath for cutting them off and ruining his life. He said he had no money for food and his truck had been repossessed by the dealership because Chloe's check bounced. I replied with a single, uncompromising text, "Your mother filed for divorce. I am complying with the legal dissolution of our financial ties. I suggest you get a job." I then blocked his number permanently. Boundaries are not punishment, they are a description of what you will and will not accept. I would no longer accept being their financial punching bag. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, poetic justice. At exactly 7:55 a.m., 2 local sheriff's deputies pulled into the driveway of the property. I watched the lay feed from my laptop in my new luxury apartment downtown, sipping a hot cup of black coffee. Chloe and Mason were dragging suitcases onto the front lawn. They looked exhausted, disheveled, and utterly defeated. The neighbors, the exact same neighbors Chloe had lied to during her brief, hysterical social media smear campaign, were standing on their porches, arms crossed, watching the spectacular downfall unfold. The deputies didn't entertain her theatrical tears. They simply stood on the porch, ensuring the locks were changed by the professional locksmith I had dispatched, and supervised their departure. Chloe tried to hand one of the deputies her phone to show them a picture of our wedding, as if a sentimental photograph could somehow override a corporate eviction order. The deputy just shook his head, looking bored, and pointed toward the street. They ordered a cheap rideshare. As the battered sedan pulled away from the sprawling house they once thought they owned, I closed the laptop. It was over. The tumor had been successfully excised. The divorce proceedings over the next 3 months were remarkably brief and utterly brutal. Chloe's newly acquired, bottom-of-the-barrel attorney tried to file a motion for temporary spousal support, but David crushed it instantly. We presented the 6-month binder. We demonstrated with undeniable proof that Chloe had deliberately engaged in marital fraud, planning to extract assets while committing documented adultery in a corporate tone pro. Herdy, faced with a devastating countersuit for damages from Apex Holdings and the ironclad prenuptial agreement she had enthusiastically signed, her lawyer advised her to drop everything and settle for zero. She walked away from the marriage with exactly what she brought into it: absolutely nothing. I heard through the grapevine those same flying monkeys who had aggressively texted me weeks prior, now suddenly eager to apologize and grovel that she had moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a terrible part of town. Mason, no longer the golden child, but just another broke teenager, had been forced to drop out of his expensive college and was working the night shift at a fast food drive-thru sent to help cover their basic rent. Julian had already blocked her on all social media platforms and moved in with an older, incredibly wealthy widow 2 towns over. The master manipulator had manipulated herself into complete poverty. As for me, I sold the house. The corporate trust liquidated the asset for a massive profit in a hot real estate market, and I reinvested the capital into a commercial property portfolio. I took a month off work, traveled through Italy, and drank wine that didn't taste like resentment. I rebuilt my life, this time with a foundation made of solid concrete, not desperate compromise. I had survived the fire, and I had the burn scars to prove it. But I also had my freedom, my sanity, and my wealth. Looking back, The entire 7-year ordeal feels like a psychological thriller I was unknowingly starring in. But stepping out of the fog gives you a terrifyingly clear view of the landscape. And that brings me to the real reason I am sharing this story today. Because I know there is someone out there listening to this who is exactly where I was 6 months ago. You were tired. You were completely drained. You were walking on eggshells in your own home, funding a life that brings you absolutely no joy, trying to appease people who view your empathy as a weakness to be exploited. I need you to listen to me very carefully, because the lessons I learned cost me 7 years of my life, and I am giving them to you for free. The first thing you have to understand when you walk away from a dynamic like that is the absolute, deafening silence that follows. When I sat in my new apartment on that first Friday night, there was no one demanding my credit card. There was no one explaining why my expectations for basic respect were actually toxic. For years, I had told myself I was being the bigger person. I thought my infinite patience and financial support would eventually be rewarded with genuine loyalty. But here is the cold reality I had to swallow. Keeping the peace is often just slow self-destruction with a polite name. When you are dealing with a narcissistic partner or a manipulative family system, your empathy is not viewed as a virtue. It is viewed as a vulnerability, a crack in your armor that they can pry open. They do not appreciate your sacrifices. They simply calculate how much more they can extract before you finally break. For 7 years, I was trapped in a trauma bond, convinced that if I just worked a little harder and provided a little more, the golden child would mature and my wife would find peace. But I had to learn the agonizing difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is feeling bad because you did something wrong. Shame is what they weaponized against me daily. They made me feel like I was wrong, simply for existing, for having boundaries, and for asking for the bare minimum of partnership. Once you stop internalizing their assigned role for you, their power completely evaporates. The second truth I want to impart is about the absolute necessity of preparation and why you must never apologize for protecting yourself. People called me cynical years ago for having that prenuptial agreement and the LLC structure in place before the marriage even began. Society loves to tell us that true love doesn't need legal contingency plans, that demanding financial transparency is somehow unromantic. But having a document signed before the conflict escalates is not betrayal, it is basic self-preservation. The people who scream the loudest about family loyalty, trust, and keeping things informal are almost always the exact same people plotting to rob you blind. Chloe thought she could just declare herself the owner of my assets because she felt entitled to them. But the villain in every story never bothers to learn how trust funds, LLC, and property deeds actually work. They are too drunk on their own audacity to read the fine print. Financial abuse is still abuse, and the most beautiful thing about it is that it leaves evidence. A paper trail isn't just a collection of receipts and text messages. It is the uncompromising story of your reality, recorded in ink and digital timestamps, completely immune to their gaslighting. You build it silently, consistently, and without warning. You build it before you ever need it. Finally, we have to talk about the exit strategy. We are conditioned by movies and television to believe that breakups and family estrangements need to be dramatic. We think we need closure. We think we need a final, cathartic screaming match where we lay all our cards on the table and force the other person to understand our pain. But you cannot reason with someone who actively benefits from misunderstanding you. Leaving quietly, legally, and permanently is not weakness. It is the absolute most powerful thing you can do. When I walked out of that house and initiated absolute no contact, it was not a dramatic gesture designed to teach them a lesson. I wasn't trying to make Chloe miss me. It was a medical decision. It was the amputation of a gangrenous limb to save the rest of my life. Boundaries are not a punishment you inflict on someone else to control their behavior. They are a clear, uncompromising description of what you will and will not accept in your presence. Enforcing those boundaries, even when it means letting someone you once loved face the devastating consequences of their own actions, is not cruelty. It is clarity. I don't hate them anymore. Hate requires energy, and I refuse to spend another calorie of my existence on people who view relationships as parasitic transactions. Chloe and Mason are currently living the exact life they earned through their own deceit. And I am finally living the life I meticulously protected. So what do you think? Did I go too far or not far enough? Let me know in the comments below.